He held the entire city of Chicago in an iron fist. Everyone feared him, from corrupt cops to senators in expensive suits. Bullets couldn't touch him, and he wrote the laws himself. But how did the most powerful gangster in America, Al Capone, get taken down not by a rival's bullet, but by a simple piece of paper? Today, I'll tell you how a quiet, bespectacled accountant became more dangerous than an army of hitmen, and what secret of the Invincible's fall is still hidden in the FBI archives. Watch until the end to learn the truth. Picture Chicago in the 1920s, a city of roaring engines, bright lights, jazz, and prohibition. Officially, alcohol was banned, but underground, rivers of whiskey and gin flowed freely. And ruling over this murky stream was a man whose name ordinary people whispered with reverence. This isn't just the story about a gangster. This is the legend of a kid from Brooklyn who became the king of an entire empire built on fear, money, and forbidden alcohol. His name was Alphonse Gabriel Capone. Born into a poor family of Italian immigrants, young Al didn't dream of a life of crime, but the streets had their own laws. While working as a bouncer, he insulted the sister of a dangerous gangster. The man slashed his face with a knife, leaving 3 lifelong scars. From then on, the world knew him by the nickname Scarface. That scar became his eternal reminder: never again let anyone disrespect you. His real path to power began when he moved to Chicago on the invitation of his mentor, Johnny Torrio, the cunning and calculating boss of the local mob. Torrio saw immense potential in the young and ambitious Capone. He taught him the most important rule to the crime business: violence is a last resort. The main tool is money, which can buy any cop, judge, or politician. Prohibition became their gold mine. While the government naively believed the ban on alcohol would make the nation healthier, Torrio and Capone were building an underground empire. They controlled everything, from shipments of Canadian whiskey to thousands of speakeasies where Chicago's elite spent fortunes. They weren't just gangsters, they became a corporation, earning millions of dollars a week. In 1925, an attempt was made on Torrio's life, which he barely survived. Tired of the bloody wars, he decided to retire and handed his entire colossal empire over to 26-year-old Al Capone. In an instant, the young and hungry predator became the undisputed king of Chicago's underworld. And he was ready not just to rule, but to reshape the city in his own image, flooding it with the blood of his rivals. Capone operated with unprecedented audacity. He didn't hide in the shadows like the old bosses. He lived lavishly, wearing silk suits, driving an armored Cadillac, and giving interviews to reporters. In public, he was a businessman and a philanthropist who opened soup kitchens for the poor during the Great Depression. The people saw him as their own Robin Hood, who gave him jobs and bread. But there was a dark side to this coin. His power was built on brutality. Rivals weren't just eliminated, they were executed with demonstrative cruelty to ensure everyone else was too afraid to even raise their heads. His organization, known as the Chicago Outfit, was an army of ruthless soldiers loyal to their general. They controlled not only alcohol, but also gambling and racketeering. The most infamous act of his cruelty was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. Capone's men, disguised as police officers, stormed a warehouse belonging to his main rival, Bugs Moran. They lined up 7 of Moran's gangsters against the wall and coolly executed them with machine guns. This massacre shocked all of America. It became clear Capone was not just a gangster, he was a monster who would stop at nothing.
He was on top of the world. His annual income exceeded $100 million, an astronomical sum for the time. He had bought the mayor, the police, and the judges. When arrested, he would laugh in the cops' faces, knowing he'd be free in a few hours. He felt like the invincible god of Chicago. He openly declared, "I am just a businessman, giving the people what they want." And it was this very arrogance that led to his downfall. The U.S. government was furious. They could not forgive Capone for his insolence. President Herbert Hoover himself gave the order, "Get Capone at any cost." But how could they do it when all the witnesses were terrified to speak and the police were on the mob's payroll? That's when two teams got to work. The first was a group of Treasury agents led by Elliot Ness, nicknamed the Untouchables by the press. The Untouchables were a real thorn in Capone's side. They were young, honest, and impossible to bribe. They conducted daring raids on his breweries, burned his warehouses, and intercepted his smuggling trucks. They hid his business where it hurt, causing financial damage. But all of this was just a smokescreen. The real attack was being prepared in complete silence, far from the shootouts and car chases. The second team consisted not of tough guys with machine guns, but of boring accountants and tax inspectors. It was led by a quiet, unassuming agent named Frank J. Wilson. His mission was to find what all the other agencies in the country couldn't: proof of Capone's financial crimes. Wilson knew you could get away with 100 murders, but cheating the IRS was a whole different game. Capone was smart. He never signed any checks, had no bank accounts, and his name never appeared on any official document. He was a ghost. But Wilson believed that every empire, no matter how secretive, leaves a paper trail. For 2 years, he and his team sifted through tons of documents, interrogated low-level thugs, and studied the books of front companies. They were looking for a needle in a haystack, and their persistence began to pay off. The breakthrough came when they found ledgers seized during an old raid. These books detailed all the income from a gambling operation. Although Capone's name wasn't mentioned, a handwriting expert confirmed the entries were made by one of his top lieutenants. This was the thread, but they needed irrefutable proof that linked the money directly to the king of Chicago himself. And they found that proof. In one of the ledgers, they discovered an entry detailing a payout of casino profits to someone initialed AC. The agents found the bookkeeper who made the entry and pressured him. Facing prison time, he agreed to testify that AC was in fact Al Capone. This was the hook. The great and terrible gangster who was immune to bullets had been caught by his own bookkeeping. The great irony was that Capone spent millions on a lavish lifestyle, yet he had never once filed a tax return. According to the law, even criminally obtained income is taxable. Failing to pay those taxes is a federal crime, and that became the weapon that finally brought down the invincible king. He was indicted on 22 counts of tax evasion.
Capone was sure he would get out of this too. He was laughing when the trial began. His lawyers had even arranged a plea bargain. He would plead guilty in exchange for a ridiculously short sentence of 2.5 years. But the judge, James H. Wilkerson, was enraged by such audacity. He rejected the deal, declaring that justice was not for sale. At that moment, Capone realized the game was no longer playing by his rules. He had one last card to play: bribing the jury. His men worked day and night, intimidating and paying off each of the 12 jurors. Capone's team was confident of victory, but Judge Wilkerson found out about the scheme. At the very last minute, right before the trial was to begin, he made a brilliant move. He ordered the entire jury to be swapped with a completely new set of jurors from a different trial happening in the same courthouse. You should have seen Al Capone's face at that moment. All his confidence vanished. He looked at the 12 unfamiliar faces and understood that it was over. These were people he couldn't buy or intimidate. They listened to all the evidence Frank Wilson had gathered and delivered their verdict: guilty. The King of Chicago was defeated, not by a bullet, not by a knife, but by the law and the persistence of a few honest men. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison, the longest sentence for tax evasion in U.S. history at the time. At first, he was sent to a standard federal prison, but he still managed to run his empire from behind bars. So the authorities took an extreme measure. He was transferred to the most feared and isolated prison in America, the recently opened fortress on a rocky island, Alcatraz. In Alcatraz, Capone was no longer a king. He was inmate number 85. His power meant nothing here. Other prisoners despised him, believing he was busted for a soft crime. He was attacked several times. Once he was even stabbed in the back with a shiv. He was a broken man. To make matters worse, his untreated syphilis began to ravage his body, slowly destroying his mind. He was released after 7 years, a terminally ill and pathetic man, a mere shadow of his former self. His empire was in ruins, and his former associates had forgotten him. He died of cardiac arrest in 1947 at his mansion in Florida. So ended the story of a man who built a criminal empire but couldn't defeat a simple accountant and the tax code. And so the story of the King of Chicago came to an end. His empire, built on violence and fear, collapsed under the weight of a simple ledger book. This is the ultimate law of the streets and of big money. The higher you fly, the more vulnerable you become to the smallest, most overlooked threat. A bullet flies loud, but the numbers on a piece of paper kill silently and surely. If this legend ignited a fire in you, show it. Subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, and write in the comments what lesson you learned from the fall of Al Capone. And as soon as we hit 2,000 likes on this video, I will release the next chapter in our crime saga and tell you about the man who learned from all of Capone's mistakes and created the mafia as we know it today. It will be the story of Lucky Luciano, a true criminal genius who turned street gangs into a corporation and wrapped the entire government around his finger. You don't want to miss it.